My guest today is Amy Widestrom, Executive Director of the League of Women's Voters in Pennsylvania. She is a Doctor of Philosophy and Political Science, was previously a chair at Arcadia University with the Department of Historical and Political Studies, and assistant professor at California State University. She is passionate about nurturing institutions committed to human and community equality, civic education, and empowerment. When I reached out to the League of Women's Voters, and Amy agreed to be on my podcast, I explained my intention is to educate the public on how our voting system works and how it might be improved to be more effective and fair. I learned during my personal studies, of course, that fair does not mean the majority rules. In a democracy, efforts are supposed to be made for everyone's voice to be heard. So I'm hoping Amy can explain a few of the most important issues with the current voting systems, and most importantly, focus on solutions. Because on this podcast, we don't complain about something, we work on the solutions. So what can we do to make it easier for all eligible Americans to vote and to ensure their vote really counts? Don't be misled by the title of this organization, League of Women Voters. Men have been members since 1974. Membership is open to all persons who are at least 16 years of age. The League operates in all 50 states with 300,000 supporters. It is a nonpartisan organization, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties. The League is one of America's most trusted grassroots organizations. This podcast is for educational purposes only. Content may contain personal opinions. Nothing in this podcast should be considered an endorsement by the League of Women Voters. If you have questions or interested in becoming a member of the League of Women Voters, please contact a local office near you. Details are in the show notes. Welcome to my show, Amy.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So the reason I asked you on the show is this morning I was Googling, even though I've done my research a lot. My gosh, the problems. And, people give me a hard time when I say I'm not really excited to vote, especially my brother. And I don't think he understands. He thinks, the only voting issues are when you hear about one or two, voting machines going bad. And so there's so many. I'm going to let you do most of the talking. Give us the big stuff, low-hanging fruit people can really make a difference or what they should do. One thing that I remember when I originally found the League was this term gerrymandering. And just when you think, I'll go out and vote, my vote counts. They're supposed to manipulate the boundaries for the constituencies so that if you're a minority, your vote counts. But of course, then you can manipulate them to favor one part of your class. And then you're like, yeah, it's like, why am I voting, right? And then people think, when you tell them you don't want to vote, they give you a hard time because you're American, you should vote. And you're like, it won't, it literally, they can make it. And that's just one. It's staggering the number of tricks and games on something that you think you're just voting. So go for it.
So I guess I'll start sort of big picture, right? And to remind folks that and listeners that we tend to think that voting really only matters every 4 years when we're electing the president, when in fact, lots of decisions affecting our daily lives are made at the congressional level, at the state level, and at the local level, right? I mean, things that really affect our day-to-day lives, like our trash pickup and our potholes on our streets, are all local level decisions. And yet, at the local level, that's where we see the lowest level turnout. Average turnout in mayoral elections across the country is only about 25%, when in fact, it's at the city and municipal levels where decisions really matter.
You mean how everyone gets excited it's presidential election?
Right.
I never really thought about it.
Everybody gets all excited around every 4 years. And right now, there's a lot of energy around the presidential election. In Pennsylvania, we've got primaries for judicial and local elections in the spring, right? In 6 months. And yet everybody's all excited about November. And obviously the presidential elections are very important, right? There's lots of good research that demonstrates that Who wins the presidential elections has serious consequences for economic policy and foreign
I think,
policy and social policy. But our
yeah,
local elections also matter. And so it's really important to remind voters that when you register to vote and you go to vote, you're exercising a muscle to vote in every election,
the
not just
president's,
voting every 4 years.
yeah, I think it just occurred to me, maybe the thinking is because maybe I have it. The president will fix everything. If we elect the right president, all problems are solved. Maybe it's
Correct.
not the
And we
case.
hear that a lot, right? Like our gas prices are high and we blame the president. The president can't really do much about gas prices, frankly. And yet we sort of say, well, if we have the right president, however you define right, whatever your leanings are, then things will be fixed. When in fact, the president is part of a much larger team and part of a structure that has state legislators making lots of decisions and local politicians and elected officials making lots of decisions. So it's important for voters to remember that. Which is why organizations like the League of Women Voters, right, our primary mission is to get people registered to vote, to get information, good, trustworthy information into the hands of voters, and just to get them to vote in every election, right, not just the
Hmm.
presidential election. So that is, I think, the sort of number one message that people should take away is that
Is
voting
one of the
matters, especially at local levels when turnout is so low, right? If in your mayoral election only 15% of people are voting, your vote
hmm
really matters,
hmm
right?
hmm
Yeah.
is one of the reasons, like myself, for example, like a judge will be on the ballot for reelection. I don't know this man or woman, and I don't want to
Yeah.
vote because if someone knows them, I don't want to mess with their vote. If they're really educated, and
Right.
I don't know a lot of the issues, right?
Yeah, so local and judicial elections are very difficult for voters to navigate because
Hmm.
finding information is hard. And at the local level, in lots of states, there's no um, party affiliation associated with the judge in particular. So it won't have a D or an R after their name. So you can't even use
That's
your
good.
party.
Yeah.
It's good at the keeps them nonpartisan, right,
Mm.
at the local
Yeah.
level. But it's hard then for voters to say, well, I'm a registered Republican or I'm a registered Democrat. I'll at least
Hmm.
vote for the person my party supports. If
Yeah.
there's no D or R after their name,
Right.
they don't know who to support. So judicial elections are very challenging at the local level. That's absolutely the case. And very little money is given
Oh,
to
so is that
those.
something you would fix? You would suggest they
Well,
be
I
allowed to be
well, I
allowed to do
mean,
that?
I would suggest, well, most judges can campaign when they're running for office. They have to stop being political after they run for office. I'm not sure introducing money into judicial elections to help them campaign is the solution, because we see the consequences of big money at the federal elections, right? So in 2020, $6.5 billion was spent on the presidential election. That is a
How
staggering
much?
amount.
How billion?
$6.5 billion was spent
Dang.
on the presidential election alone. That's a ton of money. Um,
That'll fix a lot of problems. Just
right,
yeah.
and most of the average, American is not contributing that money to those
Well,
elections. And
technically
so,
we are because it's trickled down. Whoever gave the money, if it's a corporation, individual, they have a business. They
well,
weren't born.
except
Yeah.
they're not required, depending on how they give money, we might not know they're giving money. So it's not
Oh
like
yeah,
we
we
can,
don't know. But
right? So
what
we
I mean
can't
is
vote with our purchase power, or we can't,
we
like
don't
we
know.
can't, right,
Yeah, it is our
right,
purchase power because that's where the money came from. But
right. But if we don't know who's
we don't
giving
know.
them, we
Yeah.
can't actually use the only power we have,
Yeah.
which is purchase
Yeah.
power, voting with
Yeah.
our feet or voting with our dollars.
Yeah.
So I don't think introducing that to the judicial system is the right way to go. I think that limiting campaign contributions and thinking about meaningful campaign finance reform, which the League of Women Voters supports.
Now,
Um,
since that sounds like an important one, the money.
yeah.
I'm from Arizona, and
Hmm.
John McCain.
Hmm.
I remember him. Was he one that it was a while back?
The McCain Feingold bill. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
seems like he pounded on that for a decade, and like they like to talk about it, but it sounds like nothing ever got done.
Yes.
Campaign finance reform.
Well, it's hard, right? You're asking legislators to vote on a piece of legislation that will limit their access to money, and they want access to money. So it's the same. You raise gerrymandering, right? And the drawing um, of district electoral district lines in
Hmm.
lots of instances. So gerrymandering and money in politics are two good examples. We're asking the people who benefit from the system to vote to change the system.
Hmm.
And that's a tough ask,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
you can imagine if you were sitting in that position of power, that might be a hard thing for you to decide to do, right?
Yeah.
But that's what we're asking to do. And with redistricting across the country, and we're advocating for this very strongly here, the League of Women Voters has a fiscal project called Fair Districts PA, and we advocate through Fair Districts PA for better electoral districts. And
This
one of the ways
reminds, yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say one of the ways to do that is to take it out of the hands of the elected officials and give it to the
Mm,
citizens. So
mm.
lots of states have implemented citizens redistricting commissions to help draw those electoral boundaries more fairly
There's a
and to be
solution.
less politically motivated. And so we're advocating for that here in Pennsylvania as well.
Oh, so you would have to do that state by state.
It's state by state. So the Constitution very clearly says that the time, place, and manner of elections are up to the state. So
Oh.
outside of federal protections for voting rights,
Hmm.
which are important to make sure that people are treated equally across the states for voting rights. So 18-year-olds, women, um, African Americans, and other voters of color, right, they are protected across the states with regards to their voting rights. Other than that, most things having to do with election administration
Hmm.
are left to the state and the local offices. So in Pennsylvania, we've got a state election code that provides some guidelines, but we have 67 counties in the state of Pennsylvania, and that means that our elections are administered 67 different ways. And
By
it
different ways, you mean different rules or
not
different?
rules in terms of like you have to be 18 to vote, you have to be a citizen to vote, you have to be a resident of Pennsylvania for 30 days to vote. Um, but how they check voter registration before you vote, how you vote, um, how they decide to handle mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, those are all up to the county.
So, and that's a huge thing because we were just
Hmm.
speaking about, I'm willing to give up my share of the pie because it's the fair thing to do. Like if I went to the voting poll, it's not in my interest to change this, but I'm going to vote to change it because it's the
Hmm.
right thing to do. And it won't even get changed then because 67 different ways of preventing classes of voters from voting
Well,
or
they're not,
no.
it's not, I mean, there's general protections that everyone has the right to.
Hmm.
Right. And so if you go to your polling place on election day in any of the counties in Pennsylvania, you can vote and your vote will be counted. There are a
Mm,
number of
okay.
protections in place to protect election integrity. If you request a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot and you get it in by the deadline, you submit it by the deadline,
Yeah.
and you follow the instructions on the form, your vote will be counted. And there's a number of ways to protect the integrity of that vote, right?
Hmm.
So when you request a mail-in ballot, for example, when you receive it in the mail, there's a barcode on the bottom that's assigned only to you. So there's no way if you were to like sometimes, we hear rumors of people duplicating ballots or something. Well, because
Hmm.
that barcode is assigned to one person, they will know instantly if that has been scanned multiple times and that vote can't be counted, right?
So what's the 67 different ways? What is different
But
between the 67?
so what one thing that's different, and this is something that the League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania is really fighting against, is that, for example, when you submit a mail-in ballot, there are all these rules you have to follow to submit it. You fill out your ballot and then you fold it and you put it in a secrecy envelope and you have to sign the secrecy envelope and date it.
Those are the
And then
rule. Those,
you
okay.
put it in another
Yeah.
envelope and you mail it. Now, some counties, if they say they put their birthday instead of the date that they submitted the ballot, say a voter wrote their birthday rather than the date they submitted the ballot, which is the date you're supposed to use, they'll notify the voter and say, you can come in and correct this so we can
Oh, and
process
then
your
they have to
ballot.
walk, they have to drive
Well,
down.
yeah, they have to go and fix it, but they can.
Oh,
Some counties don't notify voters that there was an error and they just dismiss the ballot. So
that's getting
it's
tricky. Yeah.
inconsistently implied,
Hmm.
right? And so one of the things that the league does in partnership with a number of other organizations is track which counties dismiss ballots for what reasons, and then we
Hmm.
advocate for those ballots to be counted. And in
So,
fact, we litigate about this. We sue the Department of State to equally apply rules and say, a
I
date
was about
on
to
the
ask, yeah, how come you don't
yeah,
make them all do things
yeah.
the
And
same?
what we're advocating for currently is there's general agreement that the signature on the secrecy ballot and the date on the secrecy envelope um, is not material to voting, right? The most important thing is the ballot that's inside. Your signature and the date don't influence the vote at all.
Because
And
it's
so,
scanned, so you don't even
yeah, it's
really need to
scanned. It
sign it.
doesn't even, and they're not supposed to look at the signature against another signature. Like
Hmm.
they're just it's they're just using it to dismiss ballots. And
Hmm. Somebody
so
found
we're
an
suing to
algorithm.
say
Yeah.
they can't use them to dismiss any ballots. No counties
Mm,
can use
nice.
incorrect dates to dismiss any ballots because it's not material to the act of voting. That's what we're
Oh, you mean
advocating
if I just
for.
put the wrong date down that I voted, like
Yep.
at the year, like a
They
year's
some
common
counties,
one?
right? So like say you put 23 instead of 24,
Hmm.
or say no, this year we're voting on November 5th. Say you think it's November 4th and you put November 4th. Some
Yeah.
counties will say it's the wrong date and we're going to dismiss this
Why do they
ballot and
even
not
ask
count
you
it.
for that then? Because it's a ballot they mailed. They know what date, they know what election it's for. Why do they even need you to
Yeah.
put the
Yeah,
date
and
on
some
there?
counties have tried to put the year, so just fill in 2024 to encourage people not to write the wrong date. And that is still confusing for some voters. So we're really advocating
Yeah, I'm saying
not
even
use it.
why is it, yeah, don't use the date because they're mailing you a bar, they're
Yeah,
scanning the barcode. It's like I go to the grocery store and buying something. I know
yeah,
what date I don't, but this is
yeah.
the expiration date's on the food. I don't look at
Yeah,
it
and
to
this
see what
you've
I'm
got a
buying.
stamp on the when the mail piece of mail has been processed.
Yeah,
There's a stamp on
yeah,
that, so you know it's in before. And they
right.
can't count anything that's if it's after the 8 p.m. when the polls close, they can't
Hmm.
count the ballots anyways. So yeah, it is something that the League of Women Voters does not agree with, and so we're really trying to we're like I said, we're in litigation currently,
Now
trying to force counties to stop doing that. Yeah.
you mentioned the barcode, which sounds
Mhm.
very simple and up to par with technology. What about the question that somebody asked me because they knew I was going to have you on the show, Pennsylvania
Mhm.
resident, about how
Mhm.
you can just show up, show a utility bill, and and not a proper, federal issued ID.
Yeah, so we there are a number of IDs you can use when you go to vote. Now, it's important to note that you can register to vote online, right? You can register to vote at a number of state offices, so the DMV or other sorts of state offices. Um, and in those instances, say when you register to vote online, you're not showing an ID then, right? You're just affirming that it's you. The first time you vote at a polling place, you have to show a voter ID. So if it's the first time voting, or if you've changed polling
It's
places and it's the first time
validating,
voting,
it's
it's just
validating the
affirming that it's
online.
you.
Yeah.
Um, After that, you don't need a voter ID to vote.
Perfect.
So in the state of Pennsylvania, the only time you need a voter ID is when it's your first time voting or it's the first time voting in that location. The IDs you can use are a driver's license, another state ID that's been issued, a photo ID by a different governing agency, a federal photo ID, a passport, a student ID, a military ID, and an employment ID. You can also just use your voter registration card that you get when you register to vote. They mail you a card that doesn't have your picture on it, but that's an ID. You can use a firearm permit. You can use a utility
Oh, so
bill.
that so currently there is a good law in place, but there are
There is
people that want to change
yeah,
it and make it less. There are people that want to change it and make it so you can bring a utility bill.
you can also use a utility bill.
Hmm.
So the non-photo IDs that you can use are voter registration card, firearm permit, um,
Now, so do you
and a
think
utility
that's
bill.
does the league agree with that? You shouldn't have to, a utility bill is fine.
Yeah, and in part because our mission is to really empower voters
Mm-hmm.
to be active voters. And
Mm-hmm.
um, we're trying to have reasonable ID laws in place that lower access, barriers to access. And
Mm-hmm.
so we don't want people to have to take public transit and pay for an ID if they can't afford it, right? And so when you register to vote, you have to vote in the polling place associated with your address, right? You
Okay.
can't you can't just pick any polling place to vote. Whatever
Well,
your address
also
is,
from
when you registered, you have to register in that polling place. So you bring a utility bill that
so
demonstrates you live in that area. I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
so I was I'm from Arizona too.
Mhm.
Went to college there 20 years. My family lives there. The border crossings are a big thing
Mhm.
because and and also I lived in New Mexico for a while, and
Also
literally they
similar
want to
reason.
give illegal immigrants their driver's licenses, even though I can't get one because with the Real ID Act, it's really difficult to get a driver's license if you're renting someplace and
Yeah.
you're not paying utilities and they're included because you're supposed to show all that stuff. So anyhow, what's to keep a non-citizen that has a utility bill from voting?
But you have to be registered to vote, and a non-citizen can't register to vote. And a
Oh,
utility
so
bill isn't going to get you a registration,
so
right?
this is misinformation that I'm reading from somewhere. This is the thing. People try to
Yeah.
manipulate you. Like, who's
Yeah.
writing that article? What
Yeah.
organization? Who's behind him? Because,
You cannot vote if you're not
okay.
registered to vote, and you
Ah,
have to be 18, you have to be a
okay.
citizen, and you have to have been a resident of Pennsylvania for 30 days
Okay. So
in
I would
order
have
to
had
register
to,
to vote.
I would have had to show real ID. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to vote. I don't have my ID anymore or with me. And then I do have a utility bill, that kind of thing. It sounds fair.
Well, you don't have to present ID when you're registered to vote, but the Bureau of Election in your locality
Mm-hmm.
confirms that you are eligible to vote when you register, right? So if a
Okay.
non-citizen were to try to register, they would not affirm the registration. They wouldn't give them a registration card to vote, right?
Well, no, I'm not following that part. So,
So if I type in my name
mm-hmm.
and age and lie and say that I'm a citizen when I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
right? On the back end, our bureaus of elections and Department of State confirm the validity of our voter roll lists. They make sure that everybody on that list is actually eligible to vote. So you would not be put on the voter list if you are not a citizen,
Hmm.
right? So
How,
you
so
couldn't then show
how do
up to
they,
vote because you wouldn't, when you walk into the polls to
yeah.
vote, there's a list of everybody who's eligible. And
How
if
do
you're
they
not on that
determine
list,
that?
you can't vote.
How do they determine the eligibility?
So that's the process of that's why we ask people to register to vote. We make sure people are 18, we make sure they're citizens, we make sure they're residents of Pennsylvania,
Oh, you
and
would check
then
like a social security number or something in the database.
that's part of what the Department of State does is
Okay.
manages what we
Okay.
call the voter roll list.
I see.
Now it can be challenging, and some people get concerned because they hear about like dead people
Purging,
on voter roll lists or
purging the
purging
voter
voter
list.
roll lists.
Yeah.
Every state has laws that guide the way that they manage their voter roll lists.
Mm.
In the state of Pennsylvania, if you do not vote in two federal elections, so if you don't vote in a congressional election and then a presidential election, or if you don't vote in two presidential elections and you don't vote at all
Mm-hmm.
in the congressional election in between, you will get a notice that
Mm.
says it looks like you're an inactive voter. We
Mm-hmm.
are going to remove you from the voter roll list
Mm.
if you do not tell us that you want to remain an active voter. And they send a couple of notices. And so they give you a chance to respond. If you don't respond, they tell you again. And then
So,
at that point, they will remove you from the list. So there is a process for cleaning up the list. They also double
yeah.
check the list against Social Security death
Mm.
reports. So they remove people who have died,
Mm.
and they remove inactive voters following this law. So every state has a law that guides the way that they manage their voter roll list.
So removing people have died, for example.
Hmm.
Move to a different country sounds great. And you got to keep the list managed. Because one thought I had is why ever crop the list?
Well,
So
if you don't want it
you
also
don't want
is
someone
is
fishing and
yeah,
going finding an
right.
unused one. But on the flip side, say it's been 10 years since I wanted to vote. I'm
Mhm.
still a citizen. I guess I'm giving up some privilege just to help manage the process because really I'm kind of questioning why should I ever be purged? Well, I'm an American. I'm born here until I die. Why should I be purged till I die?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of that is because people move and you don't stay at the same address. And one of the ways that we do make sure that
Oh, it's state.
like
It's state by
it's
state. I forgot about
it's
that.
at the state
Okay.
level,
It's
yeah.
state
And
level.
so it's just
I
making
understand
sure
now.
that the people who are in
Yeah.
the state are in
Yep.
the
Yep.
state and voting. And
Yep. Got
so
it.
um and it's also good, if you haven't voted in 10 years, I would say go check your voter registration status.
Hmm.
Your
That makes perfect sense now, Amy.
Yeah,
It makes perfect.
yeah,
I was thinking at a national level. I'm always, as long as I'm alive and I'm an American citizen, but I remember you mentioned really clearly it's
yeah.
all the state. So
Yeah, the
yeah, I
Constitution
move.
says pretty
Yeah.
clearly that it's up to the states.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And
What
I would
a,
say if folks, so I would remind people then, because of all of this that we're talking about, on election day, there's often a great deal of confusion that voters have about where they're supposed to vote.
mhm.
And sometimes voting poll locations change for a variety of
Okay. So
reasons.
I'm glad you brought that up because
Yeah.
you're going to tell me why it's a good thing or okay to not be able to go to any voting poll. I'm in the state.
Mhm.
I'm represented by the state. How come, like, if I'm down in the south part of the state on a business trip and I'm like, oh, it's voting day, how come I can't go anywhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the ways that we could fix that. So when you register to vote, you put your address down, you're assigned to a polling place. One of the ways we could address exactly this problem is to have what we call same day voter registration. So if you are from one part of Arizona and you're 2 hours away in another part of Arizona on election
Mm-hmm.
day,
Mm-hmm.
with same day voter registration, you could walk into any polling place, register to vote at that location, and vote at the same time.
But that's
Um,
not in place right now.
it's in place in some states, not in
Mm.
Pennsylvania, and we advocate for that, right? It's
Mm.
also good for voters who maybe have been on the fence about voting or
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah, yeah.
uncertain about whether they can vote because of
Mm-hmm.
family obligations or whatever the case is,
Mm-hmm.
and they decide on election day, you know what, I think I want to vote, but if they haven't registered 30 days ago, they can't vote, and that
That's
is
happened to me. Yeah.
disenfranchising. Yeah,
That,
exactly. And so if we had same day voter registration, you could walk into any polling place, register to vote, and vote.
it's
And
happened to me when I
the
moved
league advocates
states.
for that. Yeah,
When I moved from state to state, and then I just, didn't have a
yeah.
driver's license change yet, and et cetera, and I couldn't
And
vote.
you need an address to register to vote, and if
Hmm.
and so if you're staying with a friend because you just relocated or whatever the case is, or say you are just housing insecure in general and you don't have a permanent address, how do you
Hmm.
register to vote, right? Whereas with same day voter registration, folks who are housing insecure, folks who are in transition in their life, folks who have just moved states, people who are traveling for work, whatever the case could be, they could walk
Hmm.
in and register to vote and vote at that location on that day.
What do you
Yeah,
think
it would
about
it would be really empowering for voters.
what do you think about I see the term felony disenfranchisement, meaning if you have
Mhm.
a criminal conviction, you can't vote.
Well, that's not true in most states, actually.
Hmm.
So it's again, and in fact, this is, I think, a really interesting point. So across the states, there are a variety of every state has have different rules about voting if you have a felony conviction. Um, so some states are very strict. They tend to be in the South, and the only
Hmm.
way you can get your voting rights reinstated is if you have permission by the state, like the governor's granted you permission. Um, in the state of Pennsylvania, you can register and vote if you are a pretrial detainee, confined to an institution awaiting trial, um, if you were ever convicted of a misdemeanor, if you've gotten released and will be released, if you're on
So
probation or
it
on
varies state by
parole,
state, very
it
state by
varies state
state.
by state. And in Pennsylvania and in most states, actually, most people with felony convictions can vote, but it's really
Hmm.
important to go to yours, to Google
Yeah.
felony voting in your state, and you'll see the rules. But it is a very common
Do you think
misconception that convicted felons cannot vote as a rule, and that's just not the case.
it does the league support allowing if you have a criminal conviction, allow you to vote? It shouldn't be a factor.
Yeah,
Yes or no?
we do in part because, when the idea of the original idea behind our criminal justice system in the United States is that when you've committed a crime, you've sort of violated the social contract. You
Hmm.
go to prison, you uh, you pay your debt to society, and however the court decides, if it's probation or parole or restitution or volunteer hours or time in an institution, whatever it is, you pay your debt to society.
Hmm.
When you come back to society, we want to make you a whole citizen again,
I
right?
think it's yeah.
And so we do support that. And like I said, in most states you can vote if you have a felony conviction. It's
Mhm.
just making sure you research the laws pertaining to your state. And in some
When
states
I
you
first
can
read it,
vote with a felony conviction from prison. Actually, there's two
oh
states where
wow,
you can be a convicted
nice,
felon
nice,
in prison and still
nice.
vote. So it varies wildly across the country.
I think it's good to allow that. At first, when you read about, oh, I don't want criminals voting. Then think about it though. This is how my brain considers all the possibilities. What if the people in power wanted to make a law that targeted certain groups so they would get arrested for some silly law, now be convicted, and now they can't vote? Then you
Yeah,
have a country that has this great democracy, and that's one way you can take pot shots at it and control it
yeah.
more. Yeah,
That's an
you need
interesting
to.
point too, because if you look at the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the to the Constitution, more than half are protecting citizens against arbitrary
Laws.
actions
Yeah.
against the government designed to create essentially a class of political prisoners. More than
Hmm.
half are to protect us against the government from preventing us from being
It's another
citizens.
sneaky way.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
we can't just can I just vote? I'm a citizen. It's that simple.
Yeah.
Uh,
And so, yeah, I mean, there's certainly ways that that your listeners and you could be advocating to make the system more accessible and open. So, expand felon voting rights, expand same day voting registration. You could expand early voting. Lots of states have early voting. Pennsylvania's early voting system is a little strange, but I mean, one of the challenges people have is that in the United States, election day is a Tuesday and polls are open during working hours when lots of people have jobs and family obligations and
mhm.
kids to take care of. And so in Pennsylvania, our polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Well, if you've got young kids and a full-time job, those are tough hours to be able to vote.
There
And
should be a
so,
Walmart next to Walmart or Target or some 24
right,
hour
right,
place.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Till
And so there
midnight.
are some folks who there's a couple of different reforms that folks have suggested. So either just creating an early voting period where you can vote in person 2 weeks
Hmm.
before the election. Some folks advocate for making election day a 24-hour process. So you can vote anytime in the
Yeah,
24
that's what
hours.
makes sense to me. Yeah. Because what
Some
if you're
folks say
working the
let's
day
move it to
shift or
the
the night shift?
weekend. Correct.
Hmm.
Right. Some folks say let's move it to a weekend day or over just a 2-day weekend. So shift workers who work weekends could go, but
So
people who
say I
have
get
weekends off can go.
say I we fix it so I actually my vote gets to count. I get to vote. It counts. How else can they my vote not really count in terms of I don't know if we covered gerrymandering enough, or are there other things in terms of
Yeah.
the borders and how the votes
Yeah.
actually counted, like ranked choice voting and
Yeah.
games like that?
Yep. So there's a couple of ways that people feel like their vote doesn't count and things that people can advocate for. So one is gerrymandering or drawing the district lines around our congressional districts and our state level districts. They have been drawn over time by political parties to benefit the party. And so the way the law works in most states, again, because states are left or elections are left to states, in most states, state legislators, the people elected to office in your state capital, are the ones drawing the
There's
borders,
conflict of
which
interest again.
doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
That's correct. So one of the ways, and so they've drawn borders that we
They're
call
gonna
it
win. They
packing.
get yeah.
Right. They pack
Yeah.
in voters that benefit them, or we call it cracking. They crack apart people who don't like them to diffuse their political power across
But
multiple
walk
districts,
me
so they're not the
through
majority.
one thing I don't understand. Walk me through the actual counting process because let's take it's voting for governor, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
and we've got these boundaries. I don't
Hmm.
understand why there's even boundaries because you
Well, the
even though you
governor
have
is a statewide election, so the
Mhm.
districts don't matter so much. The way it
Okay,
matters is for members of the House of Representatives and then members for the state legislators.
okay,
So in Pennsylvania, our Assembly and our Senate,
hmm
those have districts around them. And so basically, say for Congress, an election district for Congress, there's about one representative for every 650 to 700,000 people. So what happens is every 10 years with the census, they'll say there are X number of people there's 13 million people in Pennsylvania, and now we have to divide them up into these congressional districts. We have, X number of members of Congress. So we have this number of districts, and now we've got to divide the state into this number of districts. And that's how we get lumped into districts. They
Oh, I
basically
see.
divide the
I see.
population by the number of representatives and then build districts around them
Yep, yep.
geographically, right?
Like if I was in a housing development in a new neighborhood, then
Yeah,
then my neighborhood gets a
yeah,
representative, and
correct.
my neighborhood's going to vote on a representative, which makes sense. But with this
Right, that's right.
boundaries, what you're saying is, no, my next door neighbor, he's going to be in a different district, even though he should really in my same neighborhood.
Possibly. Yeah, 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 yeah. And there are some really crazy district lines out there. There used to be one in Pennsylvania that sort of looked like a dragon wrapping around the city. Like somebody had
Hmm.
drawn it. So it was this skinny strip that just wrapped all the way around the city, which doesn't make any
And
sense
then that,
geographically.
yeah, and then back to my neighbor, we're best friends, and
Hmm.
we're really in the same community.
Yeah.
Now we're at odds with the now because
Well,
he's
you're
being
not even,
represented
yeah,
by somebody
by
different
somebody else.
than me.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
if you
is that
wanted to
good or bad?
advocate for your
Yeah.
neighborhood, right? If you wanted
Hmm.
to advocate for your neighborhood, then you'd have to go talk to two different elected officials when you really should
We're
be
at
just
odds
talking
with
to
each
one.
other, possibly. Like
Possibly.
we're on the
Yeah.
same page. We want the same thing as neighbors, but we've
Right.
got different representatives now.
Right. And this is how the drawing of our district maps really does affect representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can put certain populations into districts, or we can distribute them across districts. We can separate neighborhoods
Mm-hmm.
so they're not being represented by the same people. So when you think I'm really upset about, I don't
Yeah.
know, whatever it might be, if you've got to go talk to three different people because there's three different representatives covering your neighborhood, well, that's
Also, I don't know
that's
if
a ton of time, right?
then there's the bigger picture. You're thinking of it's your neighborhood, but
Yeah.
it's the state issues they're voting on. And
Yeah.
now a certain party has more control over the state
Correct.
issues just because they
Yeah.
divided your
They
neighborhood in a
divided it
different
up.
fashion.
Yeah.
You didn't see
Yeah.
it coming.
Yeah. So one of the things that I mean, we're strong advocates for fair districts in Pennsylvania and getting a citizens redistricting commission to
And what
remove
is
the
slowing you
power.
down? What's the opposition saying? And
Well, our state house is not particularly productive at the moment. They're not passing a lot of legislation.
oh,
And
this gets
again,
us back to the people who it's going good for. They don't want to change things for.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So we need
Yeah.
the people who are benefiting from the system to vote to change the system.
How's that
And
going to
that's
happen?
it's hard. You know what? You know how it happens is through our members writing letters
Hmm.
and making phone calls and showing up in the state house and
Hmm.
holding rallies, right?
Voting for
There's a
somebody
lot.
different. Voting for somebody
Correct.
different. Yeah.
Voting for somebody
Yeah.
who will support it, asking your
Yes.
politicians, will you support this if I vote for you? Right. So there's lots of ways that citizens can advocate for it.
Hmm.
That we have to do it though, right? And
This is
so
why I'm having you on the show, Amy,
yeah,
though, because I mean, even doing my research, knowing you're on the show, I have no idea about this. I would never have
yeah,
known. You hear about this stuff, and it's just this technical jargon. You think, oh, it's complicated. I don't understand it. And they try
yeah,
to make it complicated so you don't understand it, and you just, oh, I can't worry about that. I don't know what it means, and can't be
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, it's also true that you know, we don't have a great civic education infrastructure in this country. So most of us don't learn a lot about this going through school either.
Hmm.
And so
Well, that's
there's
another way. If they keep you ignorant, you can't make change
well, you
because you don't
can, and part of it
understand.
is, we've invested in STEM education, which is really important.
Hmm.
But civic education is also really important, and it's hard to
Hmm.
be an active and empowered voter if you don't know how your vote matters. If
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't believe that your vote matters, it's really hard to be activated to
So,
go.
um, I think we covered enough for our voters to digest. So, tell me your story. How'd you get involved in this? So passionate. You have degrees in
Yeah,
political science, and it's a good cause. How'd you choose this to?
yeah. So I actually I majored in English and theater in college, actually. So I spent most of my time as an electrician and a lighting designer in theaters.
Hmm.
Um, Once I graduated from college, I moved to San Francisco and I began working for some nonprofits. And my last job there, I was working for a low income housing organization, and I got really interested in housing policy, sort of how do we decide where certain populations are going to live in our city, right? Because we have real problems with residential segregation in American cities. And so I got really interested in um,
Hmm.
why is our low income housing all in one place, right? That was really what is going on here.
Yeah.
I also happened to be volunteering inside San Quentin at the time. I was helping to teach literature courses to folks who were incarcerated in San Quentin. And I kind of got interested in our criminal justice policies, so I decided to go get a PhD in political science to to sort of figure out the connection between just what we're talking about, actually, public
Hmm.
policy, right? So how do the decisions that government make affect our propensity and willingness to be active citizens? Sort of what's the relationship there? Because we tend to think in the United States that, and the data bears this out, that
Everything's perfect. We tend to think
well,
everything's perfect.
we also, we say when we look at people voting, right, it's people with higher incomes, people with higher levels of education, people who are married, right? There's these patterns among active voters.
Mm.
And I wanted to figure out, is there something about the way we're setting up our society that is actually sort of systematically disenfranchising some folks, right?
Hmm.
Not through telling them they can't vote, but just by sort of disempowerment, right?
Hmm.
And so that's really what I got interested in. And so I did a bunch of research on economic segregation, so the way we organize economic classes in our cities and what that does to voting behavior. So
Well,
I looked at the ways that public policies intersect with voting behavior and civic engagement, and I was a professor for 14 years or so. And then I recently shifted to working with the League of Women Voters, in part because, I've been talking so much and teaching a lot about American democracy. I taught all American politics classes for many years. But I was excited to get back sort of doing the work of democracy, right? Really
hmm.
working with voters and working with all of our volunteers who are on the ground. We have dozens and dozens of events planned over the next 3 months to get
Somebody's
voters
got to do
registered
it.
to vote. Right. And so why not me? Right. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe I should stop talking about it. And teaching is near and dear to my heart. And I
Hmm.
and I loved my students,
Nice,
but I wanted to start doing it rather than sort of talking about it. And so
nice.
that's how I ended up with the League of Women Voters. A little bit how you
Cool.
open this up, right? Like if we've got to be sort of solution oriented. And I felt like I wasn't
Solutions,
being
yeah.
solution oriented.
I'm big on, I used to be big on
Yeah,
complaining and just get you stressed out and angry all the time and nothing
it
changes.
does.
So
And so
to
there's lots of
which,
ways that people can help with the system, right? So find an organization that matters to them, right? There's lots of democracy organizations out there. The League of Women Voters is one of them. You can volunteer for an organization. You can donate to an organization. We're all nonprofits. We all
oh, so,
operate on
so
shit.
this is good because one of the focusing on solutions I was going to ask you as we wrap, what's one or two or three things
Yeah,
you don't overwhelm people, but actually if you join or donate to
yeah.
an organization like the League of Women Voters, then that's their job. You trust them.
It's
They will,
and it's
uh,
really helpful, right? Like
uh,
it's for an organization like ours where our budget isn't huge. Every dollar
mhm.
is is so helpful in getting materials out into our communities. We have local chapters all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and
Hmm.
so we're sending out all the materials they need to to manage the events they're doing, where they register and educate thousands of voters across the state, right? It's our volunteers that do it. We only have 3 staff. We're an all
Hmm.
volunteer organization beyond that, and we have to cover the whole state.
And
So,
if you're listening and you're interested in the topics and questions,
yep.
and um, take my word for it, people, go to where can they go, Amy?
Yeah, I was
Go
just
to
going
the
to
League of
say, so
Women
there's,
Voters website or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you, every state, there are 50 state chapters, and you can find a local chapter there. So if you're in Pennsylvania, it's palwv.org. You can also just Google League of Women Voters Oregon, and
Hmm.
your league will come right up. You can find a way to connect to a local chapter and get involved. You can find a way to donate. To check your voter registration status, to generate a sample ballot based on where you actually live, go to vote411.org.
Hmm.
And if you
Nice.
type in your address, it'll say, here are all the candidates on your specific ballot. You can print it out so you can take it to the polls with you. Um, like I
Oh,
said, you can
like a
check your
cheat,
voter
like a cheat
Mhm.
sheet, or
Like a little
we get the
cheat sheet. So
notes or
you know
notes,
you yep,
notes.
you can write notes
Nice,
on it, you can bring it
nice,
into the polls with you.
nice, nice.
You can check your registration status, you can register to vote if you need to, you can check your polling place. So that's vote411.org. And most importantly, it really is get out and vote, right? Like that is the number one thing you can do, because votes really do matter. I mean, if you think about, we have a district here in Pennsylvania that is down to 3 votes,
Three
and
votes. Oh, you mean
three
on the
votes.
district, the
So a person has
gerrymandering we were
won.
talking about? Wow.
Well, I mean, a person won the district by 3 votes, right? And so
Wow.
if you're voting not just for the president, but you're voting for all of the other things on the ballot, what we call down ballot, your vote
Hmm.
really matters.
Hmm.
Um, and so the most important thing you can do is get registered, get out there and vote, and support organizations that are really working to empower voters, like the League of Women Voters.
Yeah. And you can trust the League of Women Voters. Trust me.
We are nonpartisan. We've been around for 104 years.
Yeah, and
We're not just for women.
exactly. I was about to say again, they're not
Yeah,
just, it did start with women though, right? It was around when women were trying to get the right to vote,
that's
which talk
correct.
about, when we talk about the people in power, it's working for them. Why do they want to change it? That was a tough battle, but this is
It was a
actually,
tough battle.
yeah.
It took a long time, but right after the League of Women Voters Incorporated, right after the right to vote was given to women, and the idea was that political parties and politicians had never talked to women, right? They weren't trying to educate them and mobilize them, and so this organization formed to do just that, to step in and fill that void.
Mm,
The league in Pennsylvania actually existed prior to when the National League started, and when they started, we changed our name to match theirs, and so we joined their organization. But women's organizations like this have been around for over a century. And again, now our mission is just to empower voters and defend democracy, and anybody can join that fight.
nice.
Yeah.
Any last words, Amy? I know you probably have a busy schedule, busy day ahead of you. I appreciate you being
Yeah.
on my show.
Thank you for having me. It's been really nice talking with you. And I would just say, like I said, check vote411.org. Check out the League of Women Voters. And really just, this is, every election is an important election. And so every time you vote, you're building the muscle, and you're building the muscle memory of voting. So just get out there and vote.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Bye.
I'm way